Yeah, I'd say all of us gamers are pretty excited for Ghost of Yotei to come out in October. But even though I'm really excited for this game because Ghost of Tsushima was just a masterpiece of a game, I'm scared for it. Not just from the trailer, but also because I've been noticing a trend that's been going on in PlayStation sequels specifically for a while. And I just want to talk about that and point that out. Because if you look at all the most recent PlayStation exclusives, the big ones, you got God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, The Last of Us. Like, they're all amazing. Their first games are all undeniable masterpieces. I mean, I wouldn't say Horizon Zero Dawn is a masterpiece, but it's still really, really good. Like these are staples of PlayStation for a reason. And you notice that when they get to the second game, a certain thing happens, right? The gameplay always gets boosted up because it's the next game, the sequel game, always better. That's undeniable. When you look at the stories are always lesser than their counterparts. So like, let's go through that. Look at God of War, right? The first God of War, well, of the rebooted in 2018, the story was amazing. I mean, do I even have to explain it? If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. And then the sequel comes out, and I sunk so many hours into that game because the gameplay was just a step up. You know, I loved going after the berserkers. Those are some of my favorite boss fights. But the story, it was just a letdown. Like, it was so great, but the pacing was off. And Thor and Odin, even though they were great villains, Odin specifically kind of left out the Norse mythology vibe of the game. And then the Atreus segments were kind of a drag. And so, even though it was still a good game, the story kind of fizzled out a little bit. And then you go to Horizon Zero Dawn. The story was great. I mean, if you played the game, you played the game. Aloy having to journey out of the Sacred Lands and defeat Hades while being aided by Silence. And the second game comes around, and it also runs into the issue of weird pacing. Even though the gameplay is insane, I mean, I sunk so many hours into that game as well, the final like boss fight with the futuristic nanobots kind of took away from the vibe of the game, and just I'd say pacing is a big deal here. And then you go to The Last of Us, and I mean, regardless your opinions on The Last of Us Part 2, you know, knowing that's a controversial subject to get around, it was worse. It just was. It was a worse game in every I don't like that game, which I know that is a subjective opinion that a lot of people do, but I'd say all of us have to admit that the second game story falls short of the first game's like really meaningful and heartfelt story. And you're seeing this trend now. And I'm not even done yet, because then there's Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man 1's story is probably maybe second place to The Last of Us. Just the take it had on Spider-Man's story, and just like what he has to sacrifice to save the city, and then Aunt May's death at the end was just so meaningful. And I feel like they tried to recreate that in Spider-Man 2 with Harry, but again, you run into poor pacing issues with you constantly having to juggle between the different storylines of Peter and Miles just kind of being like left behind. And Venom only comes in at the very end, wasn't a very compelling villain, and it was almost confusing and a little messy as a game. Still good. I'm not saying it's bad, but even though the gameplay was miles above the first one, the story fell short again. So now you see what I'm getting at here and why I'm scared of Ghost of Yotei. Because I want it to break that cycle, but when you watch the trailer, you understand that the plot is, I don't even remember her name at this point, but our protagonist is getting revenge because her family was killed by these crime bosses like the spider, the dragon, the oni, etc., etc., etc. And I don't know about you. Doesn't that sound a little bit basic? Like, wow, oh no, her family got killed. Now she's out for revenge. Like, whoop-de-doo. You know, we've kind of heard this story before. And I'm not saying it's a cash grab. I mean, it looks like it's going to be a good game, gameplay-wise with all the different weapons. But I mean, from what we've seen, the story is way lower than what we got with Ghost of Tsushima, which was a very compelling story about how someone had to sacrifice their code and their lifestyle and having to choose between what's necessary for victory and what they were raised to do. And now it's just revenge. Of course, it might have a twist. I mean, you know, something to make it interesting.